And I lost your bio. I don't know where it went. Okay, well, we're live, and that's how live usually works. So, um, everybody, I'm so excited today to have my friend Gena Mabee here. We're having an open conversation about sometimes some unpopular or even uncomfortable topics. And I wanted to start by just introducing her. First of all, I'm a little bit nervous. Actually, I'm a lot nervous. Gena makes me nervous because she's just so smart, and I look up to her in so many ways. So I just want to put that out there. I'm a little bit nervous,
Thank you.
but I know I'm in good hands with Gena. And so to tell you just a little bit about her, Gena was raised in San Jose, California, and she's the oldest of 5 children. She earned a Bachelor of Arts in Communication Studies. Gena was an admissions counselor for Brigham Young University in Provo, and has been a successful business owner for over 20 years. She was an independent sales director for Mary Kay Cosmetic for 10 years. She did earn a few of those free cars. You don't drive a pink one now, though, right?
No.
I didn't think so.
Not anymore.
Oh my goodness. So she has been married to her husband Paul for 25 years. They have 2 amazing sons, 19 and 22. She's been a keynote speaker in multiple aspects, but where I met her here in Arizona, but also California, Oregon, Hawaii, Utah, and Hong Kong. She's also an author of a book, Standing Out Sometimes Alone, a young adult memoir novel about dealing with the challenges of being the, quote, only one, and trying to fit in. You can actually find that on Amazon. I looked it up today. So I encourage you guys to do that. Her favorite pastimes include learning about personal wealth building. She's tried to teach me some things, self-improvement, eating, watching The Amazing Race, mountain biking, yoga, napping, visiting with friends, and photography. Oh, and making cheesecake. So Gena, thank you so much for joining us.
This is why we're friends, Kristi.
Oh my goodness. So Gena is so gracious because I don't know, probably 3-4 weeks ago, I texted her just because of everything that was going on in the world. And Gena is one of my safe people. Gena is somebody that when I first became a foster mom and had questions about my Black biracial children's hair and skin products, she was one of the first people I was able to go to just say, hey, help me out. What do I need to know? And that's why I said she's one of my safe people, because she opened her arms, took me in, and taught me so much along the way. So when I reached out to her, this is when there were a lot of riots going on, right? There was so much strong emotions going on. And I said, I'm not qualified to do this, but I'd like to interview you, and I'd like to have a conversation about race and racism and how white people deal with it. And you're Black, and I need you, and I need your voice. And she graciously agreed to say, okay, Kristi, I'll have this conversation with you. Let's prepare and make sure that, we come at it with, purpose and intention to improve the situation in the world as it is. And really just starting to look at things objectively. And that's, I posted on my Facebook page and my Instagram page that I was ready to take a stand, that I was no longer comfortable just not being a racist, right? And actually her brother is the one, she shared a quote from him, and that actually started me down a path of just really saying, okay, I'm not a racist, I don't identify as a racist, but is that enough? And that opened me up to a lot. It opened me up to a lot more things, a lot more questions. And I expressed to Gena that when I was in elementary school, I lived in California. My mom lived in East LA, and I was living in Ontario, California, when the Rodney King riots broke out. And so in elementary school, I remember these feelings of being very scared, of not understanding, like just so much hatred and so much anger and so much violence. And really, I mean, again, I was, in elementary school, fourth, fifth grade, I just didn't understand everything that was going on. And then realizing that here I am going to be 40 years old and the same thing is happening. But now I'm adult and I'm responsible for what I know. I'm responsible in the world of my great friend Kelsey said today, in the world of the internet, in the age of the internet, it's our responsibility to know what we need to know, right? And what we choose to learn more about and what we choose to ignore. And so my hope is today that we will have some uncomfortable conversations, two friends, in an effort to inspire other people to take a similar journey of just being open to learning some things that we don't know. So that was a big introduction, Gena. Now just tell me how you're feeling and tell me why you agreed to do this crazy thing.
Well, let's see. When you reached out to me at the time, I was really quite bombarded by private messages or texts and stuff. And can you explain this? Can you teach me that? Blah, blah, blah. And at the time, I was really like raw, kind of just done, and took advantage of some time. And I've been approached by a couple of people, actually, Kristi, to do some sort of podcast or some kind of interview thing. My husband was working, he decided he wanted to create a foundation, a nonprofit organization to try to do something. And he was kind of off in his little space trying to figure out what can I do? How do I do it? And my husband happens to be white, to give some context for the listeners. And so I spent some time and I had to kind of rethink just how am I, we're in the middle of the COVID-19 thing going on, and there's like so much stress and pressure. And then this, and I was like, I don't have to do this. But I like Kristi. You're great to talk to. And I'm glad that you feel safe with me. I get criticized, or I have been criticized on social media because I'm not a ranting, raving, mad Black woman. Because I do have, the majority of my Facebook connections are white, and I don't, go off on them like happens sometimes. And so I was really wobbly kneed, if you will, because I had a population in my life of Black people who were telling me that's part of the problem. That's why we have this. You need to blah, blah, blah. And they would rail on my Facebook friends in comment threads. And I would be like, whoa. And so, yeah, so when you reached out, I was like, I don't know. But then I thought, well, you know what? Kristi's got her act together. And also, I think you do. And, I know that I'm not going to get platitudes from you. And because to me, you just can't keep it real. And that's my flavor, is just to keep it real. And so, yeah, but I think that it is important for people such as yourself to take the initiative to learn what's going on now. And unlike when I was in college, there are so many more resources where Black people have shared their experiences via books, blogs, podcasts, all types of things. And that's fantastic. So I wanted to be supportive because I know that there's this population of people who just are like, can you just give me a clue? And they need people who are willing to answer that without, beating people up, I guess, for the lack of a better word.
Yeah, no, I mean, that makes perfect sense. And like I said, I appreciate you being here and doing this with me, because I think our intentions are the same. If we can inspire some people to just look at things through a different lens, hopefully that will create more room for change and growth. So the first question I have for you is, and we'll kind of go back and forth with this, but I'm curious, how do you define racism?
So it's come to my attention in the last month, I guess, that there are some, people see the definition of the word racism differently. When I think of racism, what I mean is, and prejudice can fall under this category. So with a prejudice, I define that as you're making a decision about someone before knowing all the facts, if you will, or making a decision beforehand, making assumptions about a person based on their race, ethnicity, religion, gender, hairstyle, tattoo, whatever it is, and then act according to those prejudices. How that folds into racism means to me that people who let's see, how should I say it? Racism, a person would demonstrate racism by negatively affecting, negatively treating, shutting down, harming, putting down people because of their race, with the attitude of, your race is not worthy of me. You're not as good as my race. And it could be even other races as well. And an element that also I think gets stirred in there has to do with like power, like who has the control. So there's an element, I think, of that. When you're in the minority and you're outnumbered, that's an element, as well as the prejudice thing. And I hear people interchange those terms. It doesn't bother me. It really bothers some people. But in my family, my husband and I, we have I think a broader definition of racism or prejudice, because it's all negative to us and we don't want like any part of it. So I don't know. To me, it's kind of, I know that's kind of a question, right? People are talking about that. What's racism?
And
what's prejudice?
Loaded question.
So that's how I see it.
So I say it's a loaded question because, and Gina knows because I've talked to her about this over the past couple weeks. I would have, a month ago, Gina, I would have described racism as single acts of violence against a person or a community, right? Like and so therefore I'm not a racist.
Right.
I'm not out.
Right, because you're not violent.
I'm not hurting another family. In fact, I would then take a step back and be like, well, I have Black friends. I love Black people, right? Like I'm overgeneralizing.
Right.
But this is a month ago, I would have described that, like, that's how I would have said, well, racism is, when people are doing bad things to other groups of people. I probably would have put some prejudice in there. I would have said, well, prejudice means I'm prejudging, right? But then it was brought to my attention through, again, self-learning and just kind of seeking more knowledge that a part of racism is what you described as that power, right? When a group of people have power to, hold another group of people down. And that's a word that that was newly discovered with me, was systemic racism, right? I had no idea what that was. And I probably in the beginning said, oh yeah, that's not real, right? That's not today. That was,
yeah. I remember when I started hearing that term, systemic, I thought it meant that a system was intentionally created to keep another group of people down. And that's not what it means. So that's what, I'm with you. I was like, what? I'm not that conspiracy theorist person where there's like, this room with white people that are like, how can we keep those people down? I don't believe that exists. Maybe there does somewhere, but I don't believe that, like, generally across the board for the United States of America, that's what leadership, state or federal, is all about. But it's more about, just by sheer numbers, and being outnumbered, you've got within a system, again, you're at the mercy of the people that are in the majority.
That's a perfect way to describe it. I also want to just point out that I agree with you. I don't, I mean, and there probably are. I don't think there are groups of people putting together systems that are trying to, push people down. And so when, again, a month ago, and guys, I'm so naive in a lot of things. I will say that openly, that I have a lot to learn. But a month ago, I would have said systemic racism, that there's just no way. There's no way there's these people that are plotting and trying to destroy another person's life without realizing that there were just things have happened and evolved throughout the years, that unfortunately we are in a place where there is not equality. As much as we try to push towards equality, there are some things in place that don't allow for that.
Yeah, and you know what? I have to acknowledge that there have been groups of people that is their aim. For example, in my grandfather's parents, in North Carolina, when they were eligible to vote, they were blocked from voting by the people who were running the polling place. They showed up excited to vote for the first time, and then they were told by the people running the poll, it was a farming community, all right? So they had like a big sack, like corn kernels or whatever it was. I think it was corn. Could have been anything. It doesn't matter. The point is, they said, okay, you can vote, but first you have to tell us exactly how many kernels are in this sack. Yeah, that's what they did. So there was a group of people that were like, what can we do to stop them? And then they just made up their own rules. And it was, I can't even imagine that situation. And then they had that experience multiple times before they were finally able to break through and say, I get to vote. And so that's not an easy thing. So I think that, today, so that was however many years ago, it was decades ago, but not far enough away that, my grandfather's telling me this story. He was a kid when these things happened. And so that does exist in places and ways. I think that it's probably fewer than it was back in my grandpa's day. My grandfather, he rode on the back of the bus to go fight in the Korean War for rights that he didn't have as a Black American, and couldn't go into the restaurants on the drive there from North Carolina to San Francisco. His mom fried him up some chicken, made a lunch, put it in a bag, just as much food as he could carry. And he sat in the back of the bus and kept to himself, and, just all the way along. It's incredible to me that it was not that long ago.
Yeah. I think that's important that we remember that, because there is a part in just having these conversations with people within my sphere that revert back to, well, that was before civil rights, right? But again, that wasn't that long ago. And you personally know somebody that experienced being blocked like that. So
I had that happen to myself just several years ago.
Oh, please tell me.
So right now, I'm in Oregon, and I need to drive back to Arizona. And there was a discussion, my husband's like, well, how are you going to come home? And I said, I was like, I'll probably come through California. And he expressed his concerns about that. He's like, you can go through Nevada. And I'm like, I ain't going through no Nevada. And he was like, why not? And I said, for one thing, my cell coverage, I'm concerned about that. When I'm a woman traveling alone, I'm very cognizant of safety to protect myself. And then I said, plus I had a stunning experience there. This would have been about 15 years ago. Was traveling from Arizona to Oregon, woman alone with my children, who were about, 7 and 5-ish. It was really late. It was some small town. I pulled into the hotel, the little over thing, and I walk inside the lobby and I'm waiting to be helped. And the man is like in a book or something. He's busy, right? And so I wait till he looks up at me, and then I know I can start talking. The phone rings. He gets the phone. He's taking his time helping whoever's on the phone. And I'm the only person that I'm waiting. And so this white gentleman working there, he just continues. And then, I'm getting a little impatient. And then another white patron came in. This man came into the lobby, and then the man got off the phone and turned to the next patron and said, "Can I help you?"
Oh my
And the guy
gosh.
was like, I think she was here first. And the guy didn't even acknowledge it. He's just like, "You need a room for the night? Come again." I went right straight out of there. So no, I'm not interested in going to that part of Nevada again. That was
Yeah.
like I said, it wasn't that long ago either, and that's so dumb. And I rarely have experiences like that. Crazy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm glad you're sharing this, because it's important to realize even in 2020 or 2015, some of the
Hmm.
things that are still occurring, with him just sitting there ignoring you,
Hmm.
absolutely unacceptable. Okay, so I want to talk about. I know you're passionate about education. Especially with the position that you had at BYU. And
Hmm.
I want to talk about what role, or how's education about racism happening right now? I mean, you have some
Mm.
unique experiences, but I'm just curious, like, did your parents sit you down and talk to you about this and prepare you for the world?
Yeah, basically. So where I grew up was pretty diverse. Um, we had Filipino, Mexican, Chinese, Korean, black, white. We had quite a variety, Vietnamese, of people that I grew up in. Still, I would say like predominantly white, but we had a variety. Okay, so it wasn't uncommon. And the first time I had a challenge like that, my parents, I was 8 years old, and it was at school from a teacher. And my parents picked up on it that it was a racist, racism was the problem. I didn't see it that way. I didn't understand what were they talking about. Um, in hindsight, I understand that it is, and they were right. But they tried to help me understand by saying, you know what? It's your color. It's the color of your skin. This lady has a problem. She doesn't like black people. It bothers her because you're the smartest one in the class and you're always the first one done. And she doesn't know what to do. That's frustrating for her. And she was this old, much older white lady, and I was just like, huh? But that was really, I think that's the first time. Yeah, that was the first time that they had a conversation with me about that. And you're talking about a couple who, my father, he's a little bit darker than I am. My mother is very fair complected, even though her parents. So in her child group, there are a couple that are like my complexion, a couple that are like your complexion, Kristi, and then one who's like super dark. There's just a rainbow, and their parents, both look like me. But when my parents moved, got married, they grew up in Philadelphia, came to the Bay Area, like 1968, I think 69. They couldn't find housing. Okay, so this is
Mm,
like civil rights ish ending thing. My mother would make phone calls and get appointments to see an apartment. And then when my dad got off work and they showed up, they'd look at my dad and say, "Oh, I'm sorry, it's rented." So because she wasn't speaking in a manner that might, suggest she's from the hood or whatever, they didn't pick up on that. And so then she would call and say, "Do you rent to people of color?" No, yes, whatever. And then they finally were able to get a place. They ambushed the guy actually and busted him on the racism. They went to the apartment they were going to check out. There was a telephone booth, kind of like at the corner, and she called up to see if the apartment was available. And the gentleman said, yeah, absolutely. And then they said, okay, well, we'll come by in a while. And then boom, they immediately went and knock on the door. And the man opens the door and he looks at him and he was like, well, I'm sorry, the apartment is, and they're like, oh no, we just talked to you. We'll be happy to see the apartment now. And
I remember this story.
So these are people who they know they've been there, done that. And they would go to the South in the summer, which is very different from the North. They had to be taught the rules, the unspoken social rules. So when I came along, they didn't say anything to me until it was necessary. And I appreciate that. Because I feel like they didn't lay their burden on my shoulders. They didn't take their hurts and transfer them to me so that this is now my issue. And now I have to try to, does that make sense? Carry this for them. So bit by bit, as things happened, that's when they educated me. They would, once in a while you'd hear, well, sometimes people this, sometimes that. And but when it popped up, they called it out like they saw it. I can think of a couple other experiences I had. And I was like, well, I think this is racism. And they're like, yeah, it is. And we're going to do something about it. And I was like, dang it. Because when you're a kid and you're a teenager, you just want to fit in, just like, shh. But they taught me by example not to tolerate being mistreated. And somehow there are some things that are worth spending your energy on. And there are some things that are not. And so growing up, we did have conversations from time to time. Television is where I got education on that. We'd see different movies. And I remember watching Guess Who's Coming to Dinner with Sidney Poitier and having them talk about that, those issues with me. And Roots, when Roots came on, I was so excited. And we got to, watch that and have discussions about that. So I would say television, I got education. I got education when it popped up in my life in the Bay Area. When we went back to the South or the East to visit family, that's also when I got an education. My parents changed a little bit. The way they spoke, the way they kind of acted, it was something a little bit different than home. And so I got to see a different side of them. And I was like, oh, that's weird. And but I listened to the Black people in the South and my cousins and stuff. They had a different experience. And then I'd learn things from them. Same thing when I went to Philadelphia. So I would say from being being around family. Another place I got education was at school, really high school, from other people, my other Black friends. We'd have conversations and they'd say, they might say, well, white people, this or that. And I'd be like, oh, I haven't heard that. And that's a message from her parents. And now I'm considering it. And then maybe I'd go home and I'd ask my parents, about this dynamic. But where I grew up with all the different cultures, we had a lot of fun just learning about each other's cultures. The native languages were spoken at home. Many of my friends were not from the States, like they were first or second generation immigrants, and spoke their primary language at home, the language of their parents or grandparents. They were embarrassed. They didn't want to speak it around me. We had a variety of religions, and I was very fortunate because I had a variety of people in my group, and we were all very comfortable in our own skin and our own culture. We invited each other into our each other's homes, religious events, the bar mitzvah, the first communion, the mission, the full-time mission service for members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And we had a blast. We had schools. I mean, in our high school, we had clubs that you could organize that were, culturally organized. You had the Black Student Union. We had the Korean Club. We had, so we had multiple things. And we would do fundraisers where we would the different clubs might make dishes that were traditional to their culture. And that's how, and then we'd have a DJ on campus, and it'd be a longer lunch, and you could go buy lumpia from the Filipinos and fried chicken from the Black Student Union and all these different things. And so, the sopapillas, we just got comfortable that way. What's fascinating to me that I did not appreciate was when I left that area, my family moved to Oregon when I was a senior in high school. And where I live in Corvallis, Oregon, at the time, it was very, very, very different. And it was, and so me being comfortable in my skin as a Black girl, that's when I learned that I could not, it was shocking to white people to hear things that I would say or do that back where I grew up was acceptable. Because it was, it was like white, all like hippies, like seriously. And, a beautiful town, great people, but it was hard. I had to change. I had to learn that culture and society. But I remember feeling sad because I had an education about different ethnicities and races by virtue of living in the communities that these people couldn't have. And try as I might to describe it with words, you can't get it. You can't get that out of a book. So, and then I would say in college, there's always like that college class or two, maybe about some ethnicity. I didn't take any of those. I was like, I know all that stuff. I'm Black. But really, yeah, that's a very interesting question, Kristi. Nobody's ever asked me that. But that's really that's how I learned what I learned.
So I'm curious now, and again, I'm asking Gena questions, and I'm going to back up with what I've learned about myself. I will tell you that I was never taught about race. I was never. It was not. No one sat me down and said, "Hey, Kristi, you're white, and this is what you're going to experience in life." And not because my parents were good parents or anything. It was just, was it not needed? I don't know, but. Someone asked the question, do you remember your first white teacher versus your first Black teacher? And actually came out of that book that you and I have been reading together. And I thought, I actually had to stop and think, like, I don't know that I've ever had a Black teacher. Legitimately, I had to rack my brain and think that if I ever had, and not for virtue of, you probably would remember. And hopefully growing up where you did in such a culturally different area, you would have that blessing. But then it came to me that I had to think, for my kids. So for my Black biracial children, I had to think, gosh, they've never had a Black teacher. Yeah. At this point, I don't think at our elementary school that we have anybody in those lower grades. So it was interesting. That's why I ask you that, because I think that's part of why talking about race and racism can be extremely uncomfortable for white people, is because we were not taught about it.
Right.
Like yourself. Now I'm curious with how you were, how you learned about your race and again, how to, especially going to Corvallis and having such a different environment to then test everything that you had been, your education through experience, right? That you experienced in California and then going there. How did that shape how you raised your sons and how you educated them?
It's a great question. And I think that part of it, I'd have to take you forward to my college experience. So I attended, my dream school was UCLA, and I was planning to go to college in Southern California. But for various reasons, I opted to accept admissions to Brigham Young University in Utah. And I'd visited it before, and it was just all white. So I was like, even though it matched my faith, I didn't feel like I fit in there. And, because it was so different. So 4 years at this, as a student getting a degree, my freshman year was rough. Meeting people who had never seen a Black person. Those people, I met two like that. They were from Idaho. I had people ask me the oddest questions, weird things that they only asked me because I was Black, and that's irritating. And they were from Idaho, and then some from Utah, and it was some of it is just like so dumb. Like I'll give you an example. I had I had a friend, we were walking along the campus and there was an African looking man walking along. They had, you know, pretty decent international program. And my white friend from New Jersey, okay, I had very high expectations of someone from New Jersey. Okay. She was from, I found out later, much later, a very white or wealthy part. Oh, my AirPods are gonna die. Um, of so when they die, let me know. I'll switch out. Um, of New Jersey, very white, I guess. She said, "Oh, Gina, there's a black guy. Is he cute?" And I said, I was so shocked. And I said, "You have two eyes and some hormones. You tell me." I was kind of like, huh? Oh yeah, you know. So, you know, that's just an example. I mean, I could go on, and you can have all the experiences, the different kinds for me that you want. I'll tell them to you and your listeners. But as a result, partially as a result, it being in that environment, um, when I married, well, I knew I never wanted to live there because I loved where I came from. I love variety. I'm one of those, some people are very threatened by differences. I just love it. I just see it as rich and interesting. And that feels like home to me. And so I said, okay, hold on a second. Dad, sorry, hold on a second. I do have a situation I got to handle real quick.
Now you guys know why I just adore Gina. She has such a wealth of knowledge and experience, but she's just easy to talk to. And, you know, that makes it easy for me. So I'll mute her so she can have a little bit of privacy. She's there with her brother and her dad. But the reason that I ask her this question is because it really occurred to me. There we go. She's back. I went ahead and muted you. She's changing her headphones out. Well, you're
okay,
back
good.
now.
All right. I'm glad you muted me. We have a mini emergency, but we got it. I have
No
a brother
problem.
who's disabled and he needed some help. So, anyways, okay. So I already knew I did not want to live there, number one. It's too cold. This girl needs the sun and I need to feel it. So, number one, it was too cold there. Number two, there was not enough diversity there. And even with religious diversity, I missed that too. Um, I was used to being an ethnic minority in my church in the area where I grew up. But to see the group dynamics that can happen when there were so many people in the majority, even religiously, it was a turnoff to me because there's a dynamic that happens when you're part of the majority, and then you've got a minority for whatever reason. I mean, people who expats who live in different countries, they have a taste of what it is to be in the minority, right? When maybe at home they don't. And so then my husband, unexpectedly, I didn't know that what kind of ethnicity my husband would be one day. As I describe it, my hormones know no ethnic boundaries. I have I have had crushes on all kinds, you know, Mexican, Korean, black, biracial, all kinds of things. I mean, I appreciate a beautiful man, you know what I'm saying? Anyways, but then when I was thinking about getting married to a white man and what that would mean and what those challenges might be, one of the things I tried to break it off with him because of I was concerned about those social differences. Remember, I was weary now after this college stuff,
Yes.
and but then I learned, and you know what's interesting is I totally prejudged him. I told him we can not, we probably should break up. Why? You know, there's some complicated things. I was like, well, I don't know how to explain it, right? I've been there, done that, trying to explain. And I totally prejudged him, that he could not understand, that he did not understand. And to my surprise, he got it. He mentioned a couple of things. I said, well, sometimes there's this dynamics between that you get from Black women if a white woman is married to a Black man. Or and he was just like, oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. And then he would kind of finish the sentence. And I'm like, how do you know all this? Well, he spent about a year and a half living in an inner city in Kansas City, Kansas, and Kansas City, Missouri, where he worked with people in the projects. And it was an area where he and his missionary companion were the only white people. And so he was immersed in a different environment. And in fact, one time he has a story about he was lamenting with this family he was hanging out with, and one of the persons was like, "Oh, those white people, this and that." And Paul jumped in too and said the same thing. And they're like, "You're Black. I mean, you're white. What are you saying?" He was like, "Oh, yeah, 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 yeah." I mean, um, so he starts sharing experiences, trying to figure out what is it that I think that he doesn't understand. And I was dumbfounded. I was like, wow. And then I felt horrible because I totally prejudged him. I decided, there's no way he can understand. But I really feel like God prepared him. We feel like
Ah,
we were meant to be. In fact, my parents cracked up when I was told them that I was thinking about marrying him, and my concerns and my I don't remember if it was my mom or my dad, but they were like, "Oh," my mom said, "Oh, Gina," they're like, "He's he's lived in the hood. You lived in the suburbs." They're like, he might know. He's had more Black experiences than you have. I mean, they thought it was really, you know, I mean, they got it, but they were trying to help me understand what was most important. And what I realized is, and it was scary making that decision, but I realized that for my husband and I, the most important culture for us, where we intersect strongly, is our religious culture. That was very similar, our expectations and things like that. And so we felt that, in our mind, God first, family, career, all that other stuff. And so that was really strong with us. So we decided to have faith that the other things could work out and fall into place. And they really have. I mean, he's a fantastic husband. We're like peanut butter and jelly. But he felt strongly that we not raise our kids in Utah either. He did not want to raise his Black children in a predominantly white community. Um, and so we made an agreement that we would make sure that we lived like in a suburb of a big city so that they could see all kinds of people. And we remember when we got to that point, my husband wanted to finish school at Oregon State University. We were here in Corvallis. My family's here. His family's in Central Oregon. Um, but the day came when it was time to move, because so now my kids are about 3 or 4, so now right from them. And we went to the hospital for some appointment, a hearing appointment or something like that. And we go to the hospital, and in the office where we went in, there's a Black young man who is behind the desk. He's the check-in guy. And my little boy said, "Oh, JJ, it's Uncle JJ." And he ran around the desk to this stranger, thinking it was my brother, the one that really liked some things he shared. Yeah. He thought that that was his uncle. And I was like, oh my gosh. And that day I said to my husband, it's time to move. And he was like, what? Why? And I told him what happened. And he goes, it's time to move. Um, yeah. Anyway, so we have purposefully selected areas that had some people, some variety, because we needed our kids. We wanted our kids to grow up seeing kids that look like them,
mhm.
whether they were biracial or Black. We knew that there would be wonderful white people anywhere that we moved, but we felt like that would be an important base for them to start with, and then we could teach and influence from there. I think that's kind of what my parents did, actually. And they taught me, and I heard there are some really awful stories in the family, but my father taught me you're going to find what you're looking for. If you're looking for racism, you're going to find it. And not to say, and he was not telling me that racism only happens because I'm looking for it, but he was trying to teach me that to look beyond that and to look towards my goals, my dreams, what I wanted, and not worry about all these things, not get caught up in all of these things, because I think that's one of the reasons why they were as successful as they were. And by successful, I mean educationally, they succeeded, in education and obtaining the desired degrees. Financially, they were able to own a house and live comfortably. We had a budget and all that. We were eating generic food, but we were fine. And socially and in their relationship as a couple, it didn't revolve around those things. So my parents raised me first and foremost that I am a daughter of God. That's number one. And so to look through the lens of your God who is trying to teach you and raise you. And then second is the Black identity and the things that come with that. And then student or whatever, we were in a career. Does that make sense? So
Yeah.
that's kind of how we were taught. But again, they didn't excuse it, but they taught us we have to make a decision. Am I willing to take, and this is why I had a very hard time my freshman year in college, because I felt obligated to drop what I was doing and explain everything to everybody who asked me anything. And then here I am trying to fit in to this university, and people say dumb stuff, ignorant, racist things, and that's not their intention. And so I had to make some socially savvy decisions. Um, sometimes I would look past it and just, okay, whatever, they're kind of dumb, and then go and continue on with them and interact based on my understanding of their intention. Then there's times when it's like, you know what? I love you and all, and I know you don't mean to, but this is not right. You can't do this. Or when you say this, I feel this or this outseen. So it's a dance. It's a dance. It's a give and take. And so we wanted to raise our children that way, like my parents did for me,
Mm-hmm.
which was you're a daughter of God and you're a Black woman. And what do you want in life? Go for it. What's it going to take? Let's see what we can do.
Yeah, I appreciate that insight. Again, so I met Gena through church, and I remember this. I don't even know if I've ever told you this, but I remember when your family moved in, because at the time I had a very, very dark foster child. He was Hispanic and African American. He was just he was so beautiful. And I remember sitting in church and looking around and thinking, he is the only Black person in this entire building. And so when you guys came in, I was so happy, because then I felt like, gosh, again, for my kids' sake, of seeing someone that looks like them, seeing themselves represented, and just again, something that I never ever, you've mentioned this numerous times, having to dance around what's worth your time and what's not worth your time, right? Like making these decisions throughout your life of when to engage, when to not engage, when you absolutely have to speak and when you don't. That's not something that I've had to experience. I've never had to edit myself like that. And again, it's a learning thing.
I didn't realize that was a thing. It's like, that's just how I live my life. And so recently it's come to my attention that, white people they're not raised a certain way to have certain conversations. I was going to say to you that this whole discovering, like, oh, there's a Black person. Okay, it's all good. It's kind of like, I remember the first time I had a female math teacher. My teachers for math were males, and I struggled. I didn't, I could do math. I was like in those advanced classes, but I remember I had this, I just felt like I couldn't do math. It was like the boys all excelled, but all my, my math teachers were men. And then late in middle school, I had a lady who taught my math class, and I was like, wow, maybe I can do math. I remember that feeling so clearly. And, now I look back and it's so funny, but I think that's a great example of how people who are white can understand what happens. Like there's this letdown a little bit, like, oh yeah, it does matter. It's important to see that you are not the only one. I was going to say that for my husband, he was not raised, like that. You're white, you're black, like you were saying. But he comes from a family that's a very large family. They grew up pretty poor, but they're the ones that did take anybody in. And it didn't matter if there wasn't much food, just throw another bowl of water in the pot. Come on and have a seat. They invited homeless people into their home to live for periods of time. Different kinds of people, developmentally disabled, a single mom rejected by her family, just different things. And my husband started boxing when he was 8 years old. His father was a boxer, and his father's also white. And my husband's, like, the first time the conversation, if you will, about race and differences, he said they were in Portland. It was a boxing match, and they were waiting for Paul's turn to box. And there was a black man and a white man in the ring, he said, and they were going at it. It was a great match. And the black guy was bleeding, and his father grabbed him and said, Paul, do you see that man that's bleeding? And he said, yeah. And he says, what color is his blood? And he says, red. And he said, what color is your blood? And he said, red. And he said, remember that. We bleed the same color. So that was the beginning of my husband's education about equality across the board. Yeah, that was it. That was the beginning for him.
That's a powerful moment, though, like really, because I think
at 8 years old,
I think, I've experienced where when my youngest daughter, Julia, she was 4 years old, and we never talked about our skin colors. And this was, again, I was very naive on how to approach, raising Black biracial children. And she was so young. I didn't even think it was necessary, Gina. She was so young, right? And at the time, I don't see color, right? And I didn't want to see color because I didn't want her to ever feel, right, that she was different, she was different from me in a way that would not be good, right? I've since learned other things, and I think we won't have time to talk about being colorblind today, but I know that we're going to talk about that because it's so important. But she came to me and she said, Mom, how come I don't look like you? And I just didn't even know what to say, right? Like I didn't know what to say because I wanted her to feel loved. I wanted her to know that it didn't matter to me, the color of her skin. And that's me, right? Projecting as a 35-year-old woman, 36. I don't remember exactly how old I was, but remember, like, I didn't want her to ever feel any inclination of someone's not going to like you because of the color of your skin. And so I remember I explained it very juvenile. I said, well, some people have freckles, and, we have different colors of eyes, and your skin color's this way and my skin color's this way. But what matters is that I love you. And it never, again, not prepared, didn't know how to approach that situation. And I look now and I think, okay, this is why I asked you this question about education. Mm-hmm. I never had to be taught about the color of my skin. And I don't even remember, because again, I grew up very similar to you in California. So we did, and we lived in very diverse areas. so I was surrounded by, I can't think about the first time that I ever saw a Black person because I just kind of grew up that way. But I do remember when I moved to St. George, Utah. I was in high school and I asked my mom, I said, Mom, where are all the Black people? It was a culture shock for me as a young white teenager moving to Southern Utah. I can't imagine, Gena, what it was like for you, going to college, like in that kind of environment. So that would be one thing that I would really hope that our listeners would think about. Hopefully I didn't lose you, Gena. You kind of froze, and I'm hoping that we didn't lose you. I would hope that we would think about education and what that looks like. So we did lose Gena, but how are we educating ourselves about race and color and racism? And what are we saying to our children and what are we teaching them? Because a lot of it happens through osmosis. At least it did for me growing up. A lot of it just happened through osmosis. And I don't want that to be the experience for my kids. So I have a list of questions for Gena, but obviously we're not going to get through it today. And she lost her internet connection. So we will have another second interview with her where we're going to talk about things like, when someone says they're colorblind, what that means. We're going to talk about the role that culture plays in racial acceptance of racism. We're going to talk about how to raise anti-racist children and what that means to be anti-racist. So I hope that you guys enjoyed our time with Gena as much as I enjoyed my time with her. I'll set up another one of these interviews where we'll go into some deeper questions. And if you have something that you want me to ask her and for us to talk about, let me know and I'll get it set up. So thanks, everybody.